The exhaustion lived in Emily's marrow, a heavy, vibrating thrum that made her hands shake as she gripped the phone. It was 3 a.m. The hospital corridor was a blur of fluorescent humming, and the anger inside her was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't just tap the screen, she attacked it, her thumbs flying over the glass with desperate, clumsy speed. She poured every ounce of her frustration into the message, the double shift, the missed calls from her mom about Leo's fever, the absolute tyranny of the new scheduling protocols. She typed out the name that everyone whispered in the break room with a mix of fear and loathing. Soulless Vance. She didn't check the recipient. She just needed her sister to know she was drowning. She hit send. The haptic feedback of the button felt like a gavel dropping. Then, the contact name at the top of the screen refreshed, correcting a syncing error that had plagued her phone for weeks. It wasn't Sarah. The message had gone to a contact saved simply as, "Do not answer, hospital admin." The blood drained from Emily's face so fast it left her dizzy. 5 floors above the chaotic humidity of the ER, the air in Dr. Scarlett Vance's office was cool, still, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive espresso. The room was a study in control. The diplomas on the wall were perfectly aligned. The mahogany desk was clear of everything but a single, sleek monitor and a phone that rarely made a sound. Scarlett didn't tolerate interruptions. She was reviewing surgical logs, her mind moving through the data with the same precise, rhythmic cadence she used in the operating theater. The silence was absolute, a protective seal against the messiness of the hospital below. Then, the phone buzzed. It was a single, rude vibration against the wood, loud in the quiet room. Scarlett frowned, her concentration fracturing. She picked up the device, expecting a critical alert from the cardiac wing. Instead, she found a wall of text from a number she didn't recognize. She adjusted her glasses, reading the message with clinical detachment that slowly shifted into something sharper. The text was a chaotic, passionate rant. It detailed a fever of 102 degrees, a broken coffee machine, and a sadistic, power-hungry robot named Soulless Vance, who was apparently trying to kill the nursing staff by cutting overtime support. Scarlett stared at the screen. Soulless Vance. She had heard the nickname before, whispered in corridors when people thought she wasn't listening. But to see it written out, sent directly to her private administrative line, a number reserved for department heads, was a breach of protocol so absurd it was almost impressive. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. She should report this. She should have the number traced and the employee reprimanded for unprofessional conduct. But she didn't. Her eyes lingered on the phrase, "I'm drowning here." It wasn't a complaint. It was a confession. It was raw, unfiltered, and possessed a structural integrity that the sycophantic emails she usually received lacked entirely. For the first time in months, the corner of Scarlett's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was a crack in the ice. She typed a response, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Your assessment of the administration is noted," she wrote, the words crisp and dry. "However, your contact list requires immediate recalibration. This is not Sarah." Down in the break room, Emily stared at the reply, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't know she had texted Vance herself. The number was just a faceless admin entry. But the tone was terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice of authority. Panic flared, hot and bright, urging her to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to claim her phone was stolen. But the exhaustion made her reckless. The adrenaline spiked, overriding her survival instinct. This person, whoever they were, was part of the machine that was grinding her down. She didn't apologize. Instead, a spark of defensive wit flared up. She typed back before she could talk herself out of it. "My assessment stands. Tell Vance she needs a software update. And sorry for the wrong number. I'm delirious, not insubordinate." Up in the office, Scarlett let out a soft breath, a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. A software update. The audacity was intoxicating. Most people treated her like a bomb waiting to detonate. This stranger treated her like a puzzle to be solved. The friction created an immediate intellectual charge that Scarlett hadn't realized she was starving for. She didn't want to let the connection go. "Robots are efficient," Scarlett typed back, leaning back in her leather chair, the surgical logs forgotten. "Perhaps if you focused less on diagnostics and more on your current parameters, the drowning sensation would subside." The phone buzzed in Emily's hand almost instantly. The stranger was arrogant, cold, and infuriatingly calm. It was like arguing with a textbook. "Efficiency doesn't hold a hand when a patient is scared," Emily fired back, her thumbs aching. "And it doesn't lower a fever. But sure, I'll get right on being a robot, just as soon as I figure out how to turn off the human setting." Scarlett read the message twice. The silence in her office felt heavier now, charged with a static electricity that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. The stranger had teeth. "Touché," she whispered to the empty room. She didn't reply again. She simply set the phone down, the screen dark, leaving the connection open, a live wire humming in the dark. The distance between the ER and the executive suite suddenly felt very, very short. The silence that followed that first exchange lasted 7 days. For Emily, it was a week of checking her phone with a frequency that bordered on pathological. Every vibration against her hip sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system that had nothing to do with the trauma codes being called over the intercom. The ER didn't stop, of course. It was a relentless machine of broken bones, flu fevers, and the specific metallic smell of adrenaline and old blood. But the silence from the hospital admin contact felt louder than the chaos. She told herself it was better this way, that texting a stranger who sounded like a corporate manual on sociopathy was a bad idea. But when the shift ended and the adrenaline crashed, the silence felt heavy. The phone sat in her locker like a loaded weapon she was afraid to touch, but couldn't stop looking at. Then, on a Tuesday, at 2:14 a.m., the protocol broke. Scarlett sat in her office, the city grid sprawling below her window like a circuit board. She hadn't intended to reach out. Her life was built on the elimination of unnecessary variables, and this, whatever this was a variable she couldn't quantify. But she had spent the last hour staring at a budget report, and the numbers refused to settle. Her mind kept drifting to the image of a nurse drowning in the noise, fighting back with sharp wit. It was an inefficiency in her own focus. To clear the cache, she told herself, she needed to close the loop. She picked up the phone. Did the overtime hours resolve? Emily was in the supply closet, leaning her forehead against the cool metal of a shelving unit when the message came through. The air in the small room smelled of bleach and cardboard. She stared at the screen, the simple, clinical question cutting through the fog of her exhaustion like a scalpel. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, tired and genuine. "Resolved?" she typed back, her thumbs moving automatically. "They metastasized. I am currently hiding from a charge nurse and a vending machine that stole my last dollar. The panic level has been upgraded to a tsunami." The reply was instantaneous. "The vending machine is a sunk cost fallacy. The charge nurse is a variable you can manage. Control your breathing, reset the baseline." It should have been patronizing. Coming from anyone else, it would have been infuriating. But in the chaotic swirl of Emily's night, the dry, command line structure of the stranger's texts felt like an anchor. It was steady. It was cold, yes, but it was solid ground. They fell into a rhythm that defied the logic of their schedules. Emily would vent about the sensory overload, the screaming drunk in bed 4, the flickering light in the hallway that was inducing a migraine, the sticky humidity of the waiting room. And Scarlett would respond with solutions that were stripped of all emotional weight, offering a strange architectural comfort. "The flickering light is a frequency issue," Scarlett wrote one night when Emily felt like her skull was splitting. "Close your eyes. Visualize a steady line, a flat horizon. Do not engage with the interference." "Easy for you to say," Emily shot back, leaning against the nurse's station while the chaos swirled around her. "You sound like you live in a vacuum-sealed jar." "I live in a controlled environment," came the reply. "It is the only way to ensure precision." "It sounds lonely." Emily typed, then hesitated. She almost deleted it. It was too personal, too close to the bone. But she hit send anyway. The dots bubbled for a long time. Finally, the response came. Not a defense, but an observation. Structural integrity requires isolation. You, however, absorb the impact. You take the chaos and you hold it without collapsing. It is structurally sound. Rare. Emily read the words, and the heat that flushed through her chest had nothing to do with the hospital's broken thermostat. It was the first time anyone had looked at her exhaustion and seen strength instead of mess. It was a compliment, delivered with the precision of a diagnosis. "You have a weird way of flirting, robot lady," Emily typed, her heart thumping a heavy, slow rhythm against her ribs. "I am not flirting," Scarlett replied. "I am analyzing data." "Keep telling yourself that," Emily wrote. She bit her lip, the smile feeling foreign on her face. For the record, the arrogance, the whole "I am the master of the universe" tone, it's annoying. Noted. But, Emily added, her thumb hovering over the send button, the air in the break room suddenly feeling very thin. "It's also working for me. Which is the really terrifying part." She sent it. The phone didn't buzz back immediately, but the silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt charged, a live wire connecting the sterile silence of the executive suite to the bloody, noisy floor of the ER. The digital proximity was shifting, the screen no longer a barrier but a thin membrane, and on both sides, the pressure was starting to build. The digital container finally cracked 3 nights later. The text thread had become a lifeline, a scrolling transcript of Emily's chaotic shifts and the stranger's icy, stabilizing logic. But words on a screen had limits. They were hitting a wall of nuance. Emily was trying to explain the specific, crushing weight of a patient's family screaming at her over a triage delay, the way it felt like a physical blow. And the stranger's replies were coming back too clipped, too binary. "You are describing a systemic failure," the text read. "Do not internalize the inefficiency of the intake protocol." "It's not about the protocol," Emily typed furiously, her thumb slipping on the glass. "It's about the noise. You can't fix the noise with a spreadsheet." The 3 dots bubbled for a long time. Then, they disappeared. A new message appeared, short and commanding. "This medium is insufficient for the current variable. Answer the phone." Before Emily could process the demand, the screen lit up. "Incoming call. Do not answer. Hospital admin." Her heart performed a complicated gymnastic routine in her chest. She looked around the break room. It was too bright, too exposed. She grabbed her coat and shoved through the heavy double doors, stepping out into the ambulance bay. The night air was thick with rain, a cold, relentless drizzle that hissed against the pavement and smelled of diesel exhaust and wet concrete. Emily huddled under the overhang, shivering slightly, and swiped the green icon. She pressed the phone to her ear, her breath hitching. "Hello? You're shivering." The voice wasn't what she expected. It wasn't the robotic, synthesized tone she had jokingly imagined. It was low, terrifyingly modulated, and rich with a confidence that vibrated straight down Emily's spine. It was a voice that didn't ask for permission. It simply occupied the space. It sounded like dark water, smooth, heavy, and capable of crushing you if you went too deep. "I'm outside," Emily managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy against the rain. "It's raining." "I can hear it," the woman said. There was a pause, filled not with awkwardness, but with a deliberate, listening silence. "The static is better out there. Cleaner." "I thought you didn't like interference," Emily said, leaning back against the brick wall, closing her eyes. The sound of the woman's breathing was intimate, right there in her ear, a steady rhythm against the chaotic drum of the rain. "I don't like unnecessary noise," the voice corrected. "Rain is structural. It has a cadence." A rustle of fabric on the other end, the sound of movement. "I'm looking at the city right now. The grid is lit up. From up here, the chaos looks organized. Whatever is happening in your bay, it's just a temporary fluctuation in the data. It doesn't feel temporary when you're in it, Emily whispered. The anonymity of the line, combined with the sensory overload of the voice, loosened something in her chest. My son, Leo, he's 6. I missed his school play today because of the triage backlog. I'm raising him on vending machine snacks and apologies. That's not a fluctuation. That's a failure. She waited for the judgment. She waited for the stranger to offer a platitude or a reprimand about time management. A failure is a collapse of the load-bearing walls, the woman said softly. The authority in her tone softened, shifting into something darker, more resonant. You are still standing. You are providing the shelter. The quality of the snacks is irrelevant data. The structure holds. That is the only metric that matters. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. It wasn't pity. It was validation, delivered with the weight of a verdict. You sound so sure. Certainty reduces error. The voice dropped an octave, becoming quieter, closer. Tell me your coordinates. I need to visualize the variable. I told you, I'm in the bay. No, the woman said. Set the scene, the environment. What are you wearing? The question hung in the damp air. From anyone else, it would have been a cliché, a cheap pickup line. But delivered in that clinical, low frequency, it felt like a study. It felt like the woman was trying to build a 3D model of Emily in the dark. Scrub cap, Emily said, her voice trembling. Blue. My sneakers are wet, and I'm wearing a cardigan I stole from the lost and found because I was freezing. Blue, the woman repeated. The word sounded like a caress. Function over form. Yet, I imagine the contrast is striking. The heat against the cold. You're weird, Emily whispered. But she didn't hang up. She pressed the phone harder against her ear, wanting to close the distance, wanting to crawl inside the frequency of that voice. I am observant, the woman replied. Go back inside, Emily, before the temperature compromises your immune system. We cannot afford a collapse. The line clicked dead. Emily stood in the rain for a full minute, the phone still pressed to her ear, the ghost of that low, commanding vibration lingering on her skin like a physical touch. The cold was still there, but she didn't feel it anymore. She felt heated from the inside out. The hospital corridor didn't just get quiet. The atmosphere physically depressurized. It was a phenomenon Emily had witnessed a dozen times, but never fully understood until 2 days after the phone call. She was carrying a stack of patient files, rushing from the triage desk to the pharmacy, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum when the change hit. The chaotic hum of the floor, the intercom pages, the rattling gurneys, the low-level moan of waiting patients seemed to be sucked out of the air, replaced by a sharp, terrified silence. The Red Sea was parting. Dr. Scarlett Vance was on the floor. Emily pressed herself against the wall near the nurse's station, clutching the files to her chest like a shield. She watched the procession. It was always the same. A phalanx of terrified residents trailing 3 steps behind, scribbling furiously on clipboards, while Vance moved at the front like the prow of an icebreaker. She wore her white coat not like a uniform, but like armor. It was tailored, immaculate, and terrifyingly white against the gray dullness of the hospital walls. Usually, Emily would roll her eyes, mutter, "Soulless Vance," to a colleague, and move on. But today, the air felt different. Today, the static in her head was still tuned to the frequency of that voice on the phone. As Vance approached, Emily found herself paralyzed. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at her. She took in the sharp architectural line of Vance's jaw, the way her dark hair was pulled back with severe precision, exposing the long, elegant column of her neck. They passed within inches of each other. For a millisecond, a fractured beat of time, Emily felt a magnetic tug so strong it nearly pulled her off balance. It wasn't just proximity, it was gravity. As Vance swept past, a scent trailed in her wake, cutting through the omnipresent smell of bleach and sickness. It was expensive soap, crisp linen, and something darker, Sandalwood, maybe, or vetiver. It was the smell of absolute control. Vance didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge the nurse pressed against the wall. But as she passed, her rhythm faltered. It was microscopic, a hesitation in her stride that only someone obsessed with structural integrity would notice. Her gaze flicked sideways, sharp and blue, sweeping over Emily's huddled form before snapping back to the horizon. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She felt flushed, dizzy, and confused. Why did the sight of the hospital's most terrifying surgeon make her skin prickle with the same heat she felt when she texted the stranger? It was a dissonance she couldn't parse. She shook her head, trying to clear the static, and hurried toward the pharmacy, the scent of sandalwood lingering in her nose like a ghost. Later that night, the hospital was quiet, the heavy stillness of the graveyard shift settling over the wards. Emily sat in the break room, her legs tucked under her on the vinyl couch. She pulled out her phone. The screen was her only window out of the building. "Saw the Ice Queen prowling the corridors today," Emily typed. "Dr. Vance. She walks like she owns the oxygen we're all breathing. It's annoying." The response came within seconds, as if the stranger had been waiting with her hand on the device. "Ownership implies a transaction. Dr. Vance simply manages the supply. Perhaps you were hyperventilating." Emily snorted, the sound loud in the empty room. "I don't hyperventilate. I have nerves of steel. But she does have this effect. The whole hallway goes quiet. It's like a vacuum." "A vacuum is a space devoid of matter," the stranger replied. "What you are describing is a pressure differential. High pressure moves to low pressure. It creates wind. It creates storms." The dots bubbled. Then a second message appeared. "I saw a variable in the hallway today. A nurse. She was pressed against the wall. She looked like a storm waiting to break. She looked contained. Barely." The air in the break room suddenly felt very thin. Emily stared at the words. The stranger had seen her? The realization that they were physically occupying the same building, that this wasn't just a digital phantom but a pair of eyes watching her, sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts terror and arousal. She wanted to prove she wasn't afraid. She wanted to push the boundary of this clinical, sterile flirting and see if she could make the robot glitch. She stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of the break room. She pulled the collar of her scrubs down, exposing the line of her throat, the hollow of her collarbone where her pulse was visibly fluttering. She angled the phone, making sure her face was out of the frame, just the skin, the blue fabric, the vulnerability of the neck. She snapped the photo and hit send before she could overthink it. "Check the pulse yourself, doctor, since you're so concerned with my diagnostics." The silence that followed was agonizing. 1 minute. 2. Emily stared at the screen, panic starting to curdle in her stomach. She had gone too far. She had crossed the line. Then the phone buzzed. "The pulse is elevated," the text read. "The anatomy is exquisite. But be careful, Emily. If you present the neck, you must be prepared for the consequences. A predator does not ignore an exposed vein." Emily dropped the phone onto the couch cushions, breathing hard. The secret felt dangerous now. A tripwire stretched across a dark room. She wasn't just texting a stranger anymore. She was playing a game with something that could bite back. And God, she wanted it to bite. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like an ascent into a different atmospheric layer. The chaotic humidity of the ER, the smell of wet wool, rubbing alcohol, and lukewarm coffee faded with every passing floor number, replaced by a pressurized, expensive silence. Emily clutched the patient files against her chest, the manila folders damp where her palms were sweating. She had been summoned to deliver preoperative clearance forms for a VIP patient in the cardiac wing. It was a courier's job, usually reserved for volunteers or interns, but the staffing shortage had trickled upward, leaving Emily to run errands in the middle of a shift that was already fraying at the edges. The doors slid open with a soft, polite chime that sounded nothing like the angry buzz of the elevators downstairs. The cardiac wing was pristine. The floors didn't just shine, They gleamed with a terrifying, sterile luminescence. The nurses' station was a fortress of frosted glass and brushed steel, staffed by people who looked less like healthcare workers and more like air traffic controllers. Emily stepped out, feeling acutely underdressed in her scuffed sneakers and the navy scrubs that had seen 12 hours of trauma. She felt like an intruder, a chaotic variable entering a perfectly balanced equation. She kept her head down, moving toward the chief of surgery's administrative suite, where the files needed to be dropped. The hallway was long and hushed, the only sound the rhythmic beep of monitors from behind closed doors. Then, a voice cut through the silence. It wasn't a shout. It was quieter than the ambient hum of the ventilation, yet it carried with a clarity that stopped Emily in her tracks. "The anastomosis is sloppy, Dr. Chen. You are suturing a vessel, not hemming a pair of trousers. Do it again." Emily froze. Her breath hitched in her throat, a painful, sharp intake of air. She knew that voice. It wasn't just familiar, it was etched into her auditory cortex. It was the low, modulated frequency that had vibrated against her ear in the rain 3 nights ago. It was the voice that had anchored her when she felt like she was disintegrating. But it couldn't be. She turned her head slowly, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. Through the open door of a consultation room, she saw them. A terrified resident stood by a whiteboard, clutching a marker like a lifeline. And standing over him, silhouetted against the panoramic window that looked out over the city, was Dr. Scarlett Vance. The realization didn't hit Emily like a wave. It hit her like a car crash. The air left her lungs. The world tilted on its axis. It was her. It was soulless Vance, the stranger, the robot. Emily's hands shook violently, the files rustling in the quiet corridor. She had called the chief of surgery a robot to her face, digitally speaking. She had complained about Vance to Vance. The sheer scale of the catastrophe was so immense it was almost paralyzing. She needed to run. She needed to drop the files, flee to the elevator, change her name, and move to a different continent. She took a step back, her sneaker squeaking loudly against the polished floor. The sound was a gunshot in a library. Inside the room, Scarlett stopped speaking. She didn't turn quickly. She turned with that terrifying, fluid grace that Emily had watched in the hallway. Her eyes, sharp and blue behind her rimless glasses, locked onto Emily instantly. There was no searching, no hesitation. It was a target lock. Emily couldn't move. She was pinned by the gaze, trapped in the doorway like a specimen in a jar. Scarlett's eyes swept over her, the messy bun, the tired eyes, the scrubs. Then they dropped to the ID badge clipped to Emily's pocket. Emily Hayes, RN, Emergency Department. Scarlett's expression didn't change. Her face remained a mask of professional indifference, but her eyes darkened, a microscopic shift, a dilation of the pupils. She looked at Emily, and then she looked at the files clutched to Emily's chest, and then back to her face. The connection snapped into place. The silence in the corridor thickened, becoming heavy, viscous. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was density. The air between them was suddenly charged with every text, every confession, every late-night vulnerability. "Dr. Vance?" the resident squeaked, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, but not understanding the source. Scarlett didn't look away from Emily. She held the stare for 5 agonizing seconds. It was a challenge. It was an acknowledgement. It was the predator recognizing the exposed vein. "Leave the files on the desk, Nurse Hayes," Scarlett said. Her voice was the same, low, commanding, intimate. But now, stripped of the anonymity, it carried a weight that nearly buckled Emily's knees. She used her name. She knew. Emily moved on autopilot. She walked into the room, her legs feeling like they were made of lead, and placed the folder on the mahogany desk. The proximity was suffocating. She was standing 3 feet away from the person who knew her secrets, and that person was the most terrifying woman in the hospital. "Thank you," Scarlett said softly. It wasn't a dismissal. It sounded dangerously like an invitation. Emily didn't trust her voice. She nodded, a jerky, terrified motion, and backed out of the room. She didn't breathe until the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her back into the safety of the metal box. As the car began its descent, Emily slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She pressed her hands over her face, her skin burning. The game had changed. The screen was gone, and she was completely, utterly exposed. The summons came 2 hours later. It wasn't a text message this time. It was an official page, broadcasted over the ER intercom with a sterile finality that made Emily's stomach drop through the floor. "Nurse Hayes to administration. Nurse Hayes to administration." Her colleagues gave her sympathetic looks. Being called to the 12th floor usually meant you were in trouble. A medication error, a patient complaint, a budget cut. They didn't know that Emily was walking into something far more dangerous than a disciplinary hearing. She smoothed her scrubs, took a deep breath that did nothing to steady her racing heart, and marched toward the elevators. The door to Scarlett's office was closed, a heavy mahogany barrier that separated the gods from the mortals. Emily knocked. "Enter." She pushed the door open. The office was exactly as she had imagined it from the texts: sterile, precise, controlled. The city lights from the window cast long, sharp shadows across the room. Scarlett was sitting behind her desk, illuminated by the glow of her monitor. She didn't look up immediately. She finished typing a sentence, hit enter, and then slowly raised her eyes. "Close the door, Emily." The use of her first name, spoken in that voice, made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. She closed the door. The click of the latch sounded incredibly loud. The room was sealed. "I assume," Scarlett said, standing up and moving around the desk, "that we can dispense with the pretense of the wrong number now." She leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing her arms. The posture was casual, but the energy radiating off her was intense. She looked like a panther lounging on a tree branch, relaxed but ready to strike. "I didn't know," Emily blurted out. Her voice was defensive, sharp. "I swear to God, I didn't know it was you. If you had known, you wouldn't have told me about the drowning," Scarlett finished for her. She took a step closer. "You wouldn't have told me about the fire. You wouldn't have sent me the photo." Emily flushed, the heat rising up her neck, the same neck she had exposed in the picture. "That was inappropriate. I apologize. I'll delete the number. It won't happen again." "Did I ask you to delete it?" The question hung in the air. Scarlett took another step. She was close now. Too close. Emily could see the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the intelligence burning behind the glasses. "You called me soulless," Scarlett said softly. There was a glint of amusement in her eyes, sharp and dangerous. "You said I was a sadistic robot." "I was venting," Emily argued, holding her ground despite the trembling in her hands. "And honestly, you don't exactly discourage the reputation. You walk around this place like you're auditing everyone's existence." "I am auditing their existence," Scarlett countered smoothly. "Efficiency saves lives, Emily. Emotion introduces error. You know this." "Emotion is what makes us give a damn," Emily shot back. The friction was there again, the same spark from the texts, but now it was physical. It was in the room with them. "You can't suture a wound with a spreadsheet, Vance. Sometimes you need to hold a hand." Scarlett looked at her. Really looked at her. The clinical detachment cracked, revealing a hunger that stole Emily's breath. "I knew it was you," Scarlett admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "For 3 days. I matched the shift complaints to the roster. I matched the description of the sadistic protocols to the memos I sent out." "You knew?" Emily felt a surge of indignation. "And you let me keep talking? You let me send that photo?" "I wanted to see what you would do," Scarlett said. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air between them. "I wanted to see if the intensity was real, or if it was just noise." She didn't pull back. Her fingers brushed against the side of Emily's head, tucking a stray curl of hair back under her scrub cap. The touch was electric. It was shocking in its intimacy, a violation of every professional boundary in the manual, yet it felt inevitable. Scarlett's skin was cool, her touch precise. "It's real," Scarlett whispered, her thumb grazing the shell of Emily's ear. "Solid." Emily couldn't breathe. The office, the hospital, the rules, they all blurred into the background. There was only the heat of Scarlett's body and the terrifying realization that the robot wasn't soulless at all. She was burning, and Emily was standing right in the flames. "So," Emily managed to whisper, her voice shaking, "what are the parameters now, Dr. Vance?" Scarlett's eyes dropped to Emily's lips, then back up. The air between them was pulled taut, a wire ready to snap. "Now," Scarlett said, "we recalibrate." The recalibration, however, was interrupted by chaos. It didn't come from the hospital. It came from the outside world, shattering the fragile, charged bubble they had just stepped into. 2 days later, Emily was in the middle of a trauma code, a 3-car pileup that had turned the ER into a war zone. Her gown was stained with blood, her gloves slick, her mind focused entirely on the rhythm of chest compressions. She was shouting orders, her voice raw, when the unit secretary grabbed her shoulder. "Hayes, your phone! It's the school! They've called 4 times!" The world stopped. The noise of the trauma bay, the alarms, the shouting, the tearing of Velcro, faded into a dull roar. Leo. Emily stripped off her gloves, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. She listened to the school nurse's voice, tinny and distant. Allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, not responding to the EpiPen. Ambulance is 5 minutes out. "Bring him here," Emily choked out, panic clawing at her throat. "Bring him to St. Jude's. I'm here." She hung up, but she was paralyzed. The trauma bay was overflowing. She was the lead nurse on the code. She couldn't leave. But Leo was dying. The suffocating feeling she had joked about in the texts was suddenly real, filling her lungs with black water. She did the only thing she could think of. She pulled up the contact. "Do not answer. Hospital admin." "Leo, anaphylaxis, incoming. I can't leave the trauma bay. Help me." She hit send and threw the phone into her pocket, turning back to the patient on the table, tears blurring her vision as she resumed compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Please let him be okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Upstairs, in the boardroom, Scarlett Vance was in the middle of dismantling the chief financial officer's budget proposal. The room was full of suits, the air thick with corporate tension. Her phone vibrated against the mahogany table. She glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. She read the message. The color drained from her face. The CFO stopped talking, unnerved by the sudden shift in Vance's demeanor. Scarlett didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask for a recess. She simply stood up, gathering her files with a sharp, violent motion. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, her voice ice cold. "Dr. Vance, we haven't finished." "I said adjourned," Scarlett snapped. She was already moving, the doors swinging shut behind her before anyone could protest. She didn't walk to the elevators. She ran. She bypassed the regular ER entrance and went straight to the ambulance bay, her white coat flying behind her like a cape. She intercepted the paramedic crew just as they were unloading the small stretcher. "I'm taking him," Scarlett ordered. The paramedics blinked, recognizing the chief of surgery. They didn't argue. "Dr. Vance, he's unstable." "I know. Move." She took the gurney herself, guiding it not to the chaotic general triage, but to the VIP pediatric suite, a quiet, high-tech room usually reserved for donors' children. She worked with a terrifying, beautiful efficiency. She intubated Leo herself, her hands steady, her voice calm as she barked orders at the pediatric team she had summoned. Down in the trauma bay, Emily finished the code. The patient was stable. She stripped off her gown and ran, her heart in her throat. She found them in the VIP suite. The room was quiet. The monitors were beeping a steady, rhythmic sinus rhythm. Leo was asleep, a tube in his throat, but his color was returning. And sitting by the bed, holding Leo's small, limp hand in her own, was Scarlett. She had discarded her white coat. She was in her dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, her hair slightly messy. She looked up as Emily burst in. The icy mask was gone. Her expression was open, raw, and fiercely protective. "He's stable," Scarlett said immediately. "Airway is patent. Swelling is reducing. He's going to be fine, Emily." Emily made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and collapsed into the chair on the other side of the bed. She reached out, burying her face in the sheets near Leo's legs. She cried, the exhaustion and terror finally breaking the dam. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Heavy, warm, solid. "I have him," Scarlett whispered. The foundation held. Emily looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at the woman who had left a board meeting to save her son. The woman who was stroking Leo's hair with a tenderness that defied every rumor ever whispered about her. "You broke protocol," Emily whispered. "Fuck the protocol," Scarlett said. The rumors started within the hour. The chief of surgery pushing a gurney? The chief of surgery sitting at the bedside of an ER nurse's kid. The stakes had just skyrocketed. But looking at Scarlett's hand resting on her shoulder, Emily realized she didn't care. The gratitude was shifting into something deeper, something that terrified her more than the anaphylaxis. She was falling in love with the robot. And the robot was holding her hand. The adrenaline crash was inevitable. By 3 a.m., the hospital had settled into its dark, rhythmic quiet. Leo was extubated and sleeping peacefully in the pediatric ward, his breathing steady. Emily had refused to go home, but the nurses had kicked her out of the room to let him rest. She wandered the halls, a ghost in scrubs. Her feet took her to the surgical floor, to the on-call room at the end of the hall. She knew Scarlett was there. She had finished a marathon valve replacement an hour ago, because apparently saving Leo wasn't enough work for one day. The door was cracked open. Emily pushed it gently. The room was dim, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. Scarlett was sitting on the edge of the narrow twin bed, her head in her hands. Her white coat was thrown over a chair. She looked exhausted, not the clinical, managed fatigue she usually wore, but a human, bone-deep weariness. "You should be sleeping," Emily said softly. Scarlett's head snapped up. She blinked, adjusting her glasses. "I could say the same to you." Emily stepped inside and closed the door. The lock clicked. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "He's okay," Emily said. "Because of you." "He's okay because the epinephrine worked," Scarlett corrected, her voice raspy. "I just facilitated the delivery." "Stop it," Emily said. She crossed the room. She didn't stop until she was standing between Scarlett's knees. "Stop being the data analyst for 1 second. You saved him. You left your meeting. You broke every rule in your own book." Scarlett looked up at her. Her eyes were dark, unguarded. "The rules didn't apply to this variable." "Why?" Emily asked. She reached out, her fingers brushing Scarlett's cheek. The skin was warm. Why didn't they apply? Scarlett leaned into the touch. She closed her eyes, letting out a shuddering breath. "Because you were the variable, Emily. And I couldn't let the structure collapse." The admission hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Emily felt her heart slam against her ribs. This was it. The turning point. "Scarlett," she whispered. Scarlett opened her eyes. She reached out, gripping Emily's waist. Her hands were strong, desperate. She pulled Emily closer, burying her face in Emily's stomach, against the soft fabric of the scrubs. "I am so tired," Scarlett murmured, her voice muffled. "I am so tired of the silence." Emily threaded her fingers through Scarlett's hair. It was silky, undone. "Then make some noise." Scarlett looked up. The hunger was back, but it wasn't predatory anymore. It was raw need. She pulled Emily down. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. It was weeks of texts, of near misses in the hallway, of intellectual sparring and shared exhaustion, all crashing together in a single moment. Scarlett's lips were soft, insistent. She tasted of coffee and mint. Emily made a small sound in her throat, her hands gripping Scarlett's shoulders, anchoring herself. They fell back onto the narrow, scratchy hospital bed. The sensory details were sharp. The smell of industrial laundry detergent, the hum of the vending machine down the hall, the heat of Scarlett's body pressing against hers. It was messy and desperate and perfect. Scarlett broke the kiss, gasping for air, her forehead resting against Emily's. "This is ill-advised," she whispered, breathless. "The power dynamic, the HR implications, the optics." "I don't care about the optics," Emily said, pulling her back. "I care about the fact that you're the only person who knows how to calibrate my frequency." Scarlett let out a low laugh, a sound of genuine surrender. "The suture," she whispered, her thumb tracing Emily's lower lip. "Holding the edges together." "Is that a yes?" Emily asked. "That," Scarlett said, kissing her again, slower this time, deeper, "is a binding contract." The sun would rise in 3 hours. The hospital would wake up. The rumors would swirl. But in the dark of the on-call room, with the city lights painting stripes across the sheets, none of that mattered. They had found the signal in the static, and it was loud. It took 3 weeks for the new normal to settle. The hospital rumor mill had churned through the "chief of surgery saves nurse's kid" story and moved on to a scandal in radiology, leaving Emily and Scarlett in a strange, quiet pocket of privacy. They didn't meet in the hospital anymore. The risk was too high, and frankly, the environment was too sterile. They met on neutral ground. It was a Saturday. The park was vibrant with the chaotic energy of autumn, crunching leaves, screaming children, and the smell of roasted nuts. Emily sat on a bench, watching Leo climb a jungle gym with the reckless abandonment of a child who had forgotten he almost couldn't breathe a month ago. Beside her, Scarlett Mance looked human. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal and dark jeans. No white coat, no stethoscope. She looked softer, the sharp angles of her professional armor smoothed out by the weekend air. But she was still Scarlett. She was currently analyzing the structural stability of the slide Leo was on. "The incline is steep," Scarlett noted, sipping her coffee. "The friction coefficient seems low." "He's fine," Emily said, bumping her shoulder against Scarlett's. "He bounces. It's a feature of being 6. Scarlett hummed, but she didn't look away from the boy. "I am not accustomed to variables that bounce." "You're learning," Emily teased. She reached out and took Scarlett's hand. They were in public. Anyone could see them. A colleague, a patient, a board member. Scarlett didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through Emily's, her grip firm. "Dr. Patel is walking his dog at 3 o'clock, Scarlett said calmly, not turning her head. Emily stiffened. "Do you want to let go?" Scarlett turned to look at her. The sun caught the blue of her eyes, making them look less like ice and more like open sky. "No, I have recalculated the risk assessment." "And?" "The risk is acceptable," Scarlett said. She squeezed Emily's hand. "The data suggests that the benefits of this connection outweigh the potential social fallout. The heart rhythm. It requires a dual lead to function correctly." "You are such a nerd," Emily laughed, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "A romantic nerd, but a nerd." "I am precise," Scarlett corrected, a small smile playing on her lips. "And you, Nurse Hayes, are the only variable I have no intention of controlling." "Good," Emily said, resting her head on Scarlett's shoulder as they watched Leo reach the top of the slide and raise his arms in victory. "Because I'm pretty sure I'm uncontrollable." "I know," Scarlett whispered, kissing the top of her head. "That's the best part." "Mom, look!" Leo shouted from the slide. "I'm a rocket!" "I see you, rocket!" Emily yelled back. "Trajectory looks good," Scarlett called out, her voice projecting with that familiar command. "Launch approved." Emily smiled. The mistake text, the wrong number, the panic. It had all led here, to a park bench in October, with a woman who saw the world in spreadsheets, but loved with an intensity that defied every algorithm. It was the most accurate data point of her life. The car was warm, the heater battling the November chill outside. They were parked in Emily's driveway, the engine idling. Leo was asleep in the back seat. Emily's hand rested on the center console, and Scarlett's hand was linked over hers, their fingers knotted together. The phone on the dashboard buzzed. A notification lit up the dark interior. "Do not answer. Hospital admin." Neither of them looked at it. "The signal is clear now," Emily whispered, squeezing Scarlett's hand. "No interference." "Just the steady hum," Scarlett agreed, leaning across the console to kiss her. 2 lives, finally syncing up. If you want to hear more stories about finding the perfect frequency in the static, hit subscribe. The summons didn't come with the dignity of a private email or a quiet tap on the shoulder. It was a broadcast, a sterile command that echoed through the chaotic humidity of the ER hallways, bouncing off the linoleum and the trauma bays. "Nurse Hayes to administration. Nurse Hayes to the 12th floor immediately." The intercom crackled and died, leaving a silence in its wake that felt heavier than the noise it had replaced. Emily froze near the medication cart, a vial of saline in her hand. Her colleagues exchanged glances, sympathetic grimaces that said, "Dead man walking." In the hierarchy of the hospital, being summoned to the 12th floor was rarely a commendation. It was an autopsy of a career. Usually, it meant a medication error, a patient complaint, or a budget cut. They didn't know that Emily was walking into a different kind of execution entirely. She smoothed the front of her scrubs, her hands damp and trembling, and handed the saline to a confused intern. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her throat felt like it had been packed with cotton. The elevator ride was an ascent into a vacuum. With every passing floor, the smell of antiseptic and old blood faded, replaced by the scent of expensive climate control and silence. When the doors slid open on the 12th floor, the air was cool enough to prickle the skin on her arms. Emily walked down the long, carpeted corridor, her sneakers silent, feeling like an intruder in a temple. The door to the chief of surgery's office was closed, a heavy mahogany barrier that separated the gods from the mortals. She knocked. The sound was sharp, intrusive. "Enter." The voice was low, modulated, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice that had told her she was structurally sound while she stood in the rain. Emily pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was a study in intimidation. One wall was entirely glass, framing the city skyline in a grid of distant, glittering lights. The rest of the room was shadowed, lit only by the blue glow of a monitor and a single architectural desk lamp. Scarlett Vance was standing by the window, her back to the door, her silhouette cut sharp against the darkness. She didn't turn around immediately. She let the silence stretch, tightening the tension in the room until it felt like a physical weight pressing against Emily's chest. "Close the door, Emily," Scarlett said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Emily obeyed. The latch clicked shut, sealing them in. The sound was final, like a lock turning in a cell. "I assume," Scarlett said, finally turning to face her, "that we can dispense with the pretense of the wrong number now?" She moved toward the desk with a fluid, predatory grace, leaning back against the mahogany edge and crossing her arms. The posture was deceptively casual, but the energy radiating off her was intense, a high-voltage hum that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. Scarlett's eyes, sharp and calculating behind her rimless glasses, tracked Emily's every micro-movement. "I didn't know," Emily blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in her rush to build a defense. "I swear to God, Dr. Vance, I didn't know it was you. The contact was just an admin number. If I had known—" "If you had known," Scarlett interrupted, her voice smooth and cool, "you wouldn't have told me about the drowning sensation. You wouldn't have called the administration a parasitic organism. And you certainly wouldn't have sent me a photograph of your neck." The reminder hit Emily like a physical blow. Heat flooded her face, burning up from her collarbone, the very anatomy she had exposed in that reckless late-night photo. "That was inappropriate," she stammered, fighting the urge to retreat toward the door. "I was tired. I was venting. I'll delete the number. I'll transfer units if that's what you want." "Did I ask you to transfer?" Scarlett asked. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "No, but you can't possibly—" Emily stopped, taking a breath to steady the shake in her voice. You knew. You knew it was me. I suspected on day 2, Scarlett admitted, tilting her head slightly, studying Emily like a complex surgical puzzle. I confirmed it on day 3. The complaints about the ventilation in Trauma Bay 4 matched the maintenance requests. The timing of your breaks matched the timestamps of your texts. And you let me keep talking? Emily's fear sparked into indignation. The power imbalance was massive, but the betrayal felt personal. I called you soulless. I called you a robot, and you just watched me? Like I was some kind of experiment? I wanted to see if the fire was real, Scarlett said softly. She took another step. She was close now, invading Emily's personal space with an arrogance that was breathtaking. People in this hospital fear me, Emily. They agree with me. They flatter me. But you? You argued with me. You told me my operating system was glitching. I was venting to a stranger, Emily countered, holding her ground, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't brave. It was an accident. Was it? Scarlett challenged. She reached out, her hand hovering in the charged air between them. You exposed your throat to a predator, Emily. That is not an accident. That is an invitation. Emily stopped breathing. The office, the city lights, the threat to her job, it all blurred into the background. There was only the scent of sandalwood and the terrifying magnetic pull of the woman standing inches away. Scarlett didn't retreat. She reached up, her cool fingers brushing against the side of Emily's face. She tucked a stray curl of hair back under Emily's scrub cap, the gesture shocking in its intimacy. You are chaotic, Scarlett whispered, her thumb grazing the sensitive skin behind Emily's ear. You are messy. You run on caffeine and emotion. By all metrics, you should be intolerable to me. But, Emily breathed, unable to look away from Scarlett's dark, dilated pupils. But, Scarlett murmured, her gaze dropping to Emily's lips before snapping back up. You are the only thing in this building that feels real. The structure holds, Emily, even when you think you're drowning. The professional boundary wasn't just crossed, it was obliterated. The air between them was thick, heavy with weeks of digital confessions and suppressed desire. So what happens now? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Do you fire me? Or do we keep pretending I didn't call the chief of surgery a sadist? Scarlett's hand lingered on her cheek, a possessive weight. We do not pretend, she said, her voice dropping to a frequency that vibrated in Emily's bones. We recalibrate. The recalibration period lasted exactly 48 hours. It was a strange, suspended state where the air between them hummed with a frequency only they could hear, a secret channel running beneath the sterile noise of the hospital. They didn't speak about the moment in the office, but the dynamic had shifted. When Scarlett passed the nurse's station, her gaze lingered on Emily for a fraction of a second longer than protocol allowed, a microscopic acknowledgement of the exposed vein. Emily felt it every time, a phantom touch against her neck that made the grueling 12-hour shifts feel surreally charged. But the hospital was a machine that consumed equilibrium. And 2 days later, the machine broke. It started with a multi-car pileup on the interstate. The ER turned into a slaughterhouse of controlled chaos. Emily was deep in Trauma Bay 1, her hands gloved and slick, holding pressure on a lacerated femoral artery while the attending barked orders for blood products. The noise was deafening, monitors screaming, nurses shouting counts, the wet, metallic smell of iron filling the small room. Emily was in the zone, her mind narrowed down to the single variable of the patient's dropping blood pressure. Then, the unit secretary, a young woman named Sarah, pushed through the curtain. Her face was pale. She held a phone out, dodging a swinging IV line. Hayes, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the din. It's the school. They've called 3 times in 5 minutes. They say it's an emergency. Emily's heart stopped. The patient on the table was dying, but the cold dread that washed over her had nothing to do with the arterial bleed. Put it on speaker, she ordered, her voice tight. Hold it to my ear, Sarah obliged. The school nurse's voice came through, tinny and frantic, distorted by the background noise of the trauma bay. "Ms. Hayes, it's Leo. He ate a cookie another student brought in. We administered the EpiPen, but his airway is compromising. The ambulance is 5 minutes out. You need to meet us at the entrance." The world tilted. The drowning sensation Emily had joked about in her texts suddenly filled her lungs with black, freezing water. Leo, her son, who was small and loud and afraid of thunderstorms, was suffocating in a school hallway. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to let go of the patient, to run, to tear through the doors and get to him. But she looked down. If she let go of the artery before the vascular surgeon arrived, the man on the table would bleed out in 30 seconds. She was the structure holding him together. She was trapped. "Bring him here," Emily choked out, tears blurring her vision, hot and stinging. "Bring him to St. Jude's. I'm here. Just keep him breathing." "We're trying," the nurse said, and the line went dead. "Vascular is 2 minutes out," someone shouted. 2 minutes. 2 minutes was an eternity when an airway was closing. Emily couldn't leave. She was paralyzed by her own competence, anchored to a dying stranger while her son needed her. Panic clawed at her throat, wild and desperate. She needed a lifeline. She needed a variable she could control. "Sarah," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Take the phone. Text the contact, do not answer. Do it now." Sarah looked confused, but terrified enough to obey. "What do I type?" "Leo, anaphylaxis, incoming. I can't leave the bay. Help me." 5 floors up, the boardroom was a vacuum of expensive suits and circular arguments. Scarlett Vance sat at the head of the mahogany table, listening to the chief financial officer drone on about liability insurance adjustments. She was bored. Her mind was dissecting the structural flaws in his argument with surgical precision, waiting for the right moment to sever the logic. Her phone buzzed against the table. One short, sharp vibration. Scarlett ignored it. She never checked her phone in meetings. It was a rule. It buzzed again. And again. She frowned. Only one number had the override permission to vibrate through the Do Not Disturb protocol she had set for this meeting. She flipped the phone over. The text was chaotic, misspelled, a distress flare sent up from the bottom of the ocean. "Leo, anaphylaxis, incoming. I can't leave. Help." The CFO stopped talking. The sudden silence in the room was heavy, confused. Scarlett Vance, the woman who regarded interruptions as personal insults, had gone completely still. Her eyes, usually cold and unreadable, darkened with a terrifying intensity. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask for a recess. She stood up, the legs of her chair scraping violently against the floor. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the finality of a flatline. "Dr. Vance, we haven't voted on the—" "I said adjourned." She was moving before the sentence was finished. She swept her files off the table, leaving them scattered, and walked out the double doors without looking back. She didn't walk to the elevators. She took the stairs, descending the 5 flights with a speed that bordered on reckless. She bypassed the general ER intake, ignoring the startled looks from the staff who had never seen the chief of surgery move with such unmasked urgency. She hit the ambulance bay just as the siren wailed into the driveway. Down in the trauma bay, the vascular surgeon finally clamped the artery. "I've got it, Hayes. Step out." Emily stripped off her gloves, her hands shaking so violently she tore the latex. She didn't wash up. She ran. She sprinted through the corridors, her scrubs stained with a stranger's blood, her breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. She checked the main triage. Nothing. She checked the pediatric intake. Empty. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Where were they? Then she saw Sarah, the unit secretary, pointing toward the elevators. "VIP wing," Sarah yelled. "Dr. Vance took him to the VIP wing." Emily scrambled into the elevator, jamming the button. The VIP wing. The quiet, high-tech sanctuary reserved for donors and board members. Why would he be there? When the doors opened, the silence hit her. It wasn't the terrifying silence of a crash. It was the hush of competence. She ran to room 1. The door was open. The room was dim, lit by the soft glow of the monitors. The steady, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a sinus rhythm filled the air. It was the most beautiful sound Emily had ever heard. Leo was in the bed, looking tiny against the white sheets. He was asleep, an oxygen mask over his face, an IV line taped securely to his small hand. And sitting in the chair beside him, still wearing her silk blouse from the board meeting, was Scarlett. She had discarded her white coat. Her sleeves were rolled up. She was holding Leo's other hand, her thumb tracing soothing, rhythmic circles on his skin. She looked up as Emily burst in, breathless and terrified. The mask was gone. Scarlett didn't look like the stoic surgeon or the terrifying admin. She looked fierce. She looked protective. "He is stable," Scarlett said immediately, her voice low and steady, anchoring Emily's spinning world. "The airway is patent. The swelling is reducing. I administered the epinephrine and steroids myself. He is going to be fine, Emily." Emily made a broken sound, half sob, half laugh, and collapsed against the doorframe. Her legs gave out. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. She heard the click of heels on the floor. Then Scarlett was there, kneeling in front of her. Scarlett Vance, kneeling on the floor of a hospital room in a $1,000 outfit. She reached out and gripped Emily's shoulders. Her hands were solid, warm. "Breathe," Scarlett commanded, but the order was soft, intimate. "The structure held. You did not fail him." "I couldn't leave," Emily wept, looking up into Scarlett's eyes. "I was stuck. I couldn't get to him." "You got to me," Scarlett whispered. "You sent the signal. I received it. That is the only variable that matters." Emily looked at the woman who had dismantled a board meeting to save her son. She saw the fierce intelligence in Scarlett's eyes, the way her hands were still protective, even now. The gratitude that flooded Emily's chest was terrifying. It wasn't just relief. It was the realization that the robot had a heart, and that heart was currently beating in sync with hers. "You broke protocol," Emily whispered, reaching out to touch Scarlett's face, needing to verify she was real. Scarlett leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a brief, unguarded moment. "Protocol is for normal operations," she murmured against Emily's palm. "This was a critical failure of the system. I simply intervened." "People are going to talk," Emily said, glancing at the open door where a nurse was pretending not to stare. The chief of surgery playing private ambulance for a trauma nurse's kid? "Let them talk," Scarlett said, opening her eyes. The steel was back, but it was tempered now, an alloy of strength and something softer. "I do not care about the noise, Emily. I care about the suture." She stood up and offered her hand to pull Emily to her feet. As Emily stood, shaky but standing, she realized the rumors didn't matter. The job didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the woman standing between her and the collapse, holding the weight so she didn't have to. The crisis had breached the wall, but in the wreckage, they had found a foundation. The adrenaline crash was inevitable. A physical descent that felt less like landing and more like running into a concrete wall. By 3 a.m., the hospital had settled into its dark, rhythmic quiet, a beast slumbering with one eye open. The chaotic humidity of the earlier crisis had evaporated, leaving behind the sterile, chilled air of the graveyard shift. Leo was extubated, his breathing a steady, miraculous rhythm in the pediatric ward, guarded by a fleet of nurses who had all seemingly adopted him. Emily had refused to go home, but the pediatric charge nurse, a woman who terrified even the residents, had physically steered her out of the room, ordering her to find coffee or a bed. Emily wandered the halls, a ghost in blood-spotted scrubs. She didn't go to the cafeteria. Her feet, moving on a subconscious autopilot, carried her to the surgical floor. The corridors here were dimmer, the silence deeper. She stopped outside the on-call room at the end of the hall, the one usually reserved for attendings who had pulled double shifts. She knew Scarlett was there. The board showed that Dr. Vance had finished a marathon valve replacement an hour ago, because apparently, saving a child from anaphylaxis wasn't enough trauma for one day. She had to go fix a heart immediately after. The door was cracked open an inch, spilling a sliver of yellow light onto the linoleum. Emily pushed it gently. The room was small, utilitarian, and grim. It smelled of industrial laundry detergent and old dust. But sitting on the edge of the narrow twin bed, illuminated by the streetlights filtering through the blinds, was Scarlett. She had discarded the silk blouse from the board meeting for a fresh set of hospital greens, but she hadn't changed her posture. Her head was in her hands, her elbows resting on her knees. Her white coat was thrown haphazardly over a chair, a discarded shell. She looked wrecked. Not the clinical, managed fatigue she usually wore like a badge of honor, but a human, bone-deep weariness that stripped away the Dr. Vance persona and left just the woman underneath. "You should be sleeping," Emily said softly, stepping inside. Scarlett's head snapped up. She blinked, her hand instinctively going to adjust glasses that weren't there. Her eyes were dark, unguarded, and rimmed with red. "I could say the same to you. The pediatric team said you were hovering." "I wasn't hovering, I was monitoring," Emily corrected, though her voice lacked its usual fire. She turned and clicked the lock on the door. The sound was loud in the quiet room, a definitive separation from the hospital outside. "He is stable, Emily," Scarlett said, her voice raspy. She cleared her throat, trying to summon the command line. "The epinephrine half-life is short. The rebound window has passed. The data suggests—" "Stop," Emily said. She crossed the small room in 3 strides. She didn't stop until she was standing between Scarlett's knees, looking down at her. "Stop being the data analyst for 1 second. You saved him. You left your meeting. You broke every rule in your own book." Scarlett looked up. For the first time since they met, she didn't have an answer ready. She looked at Emily's scrubs, at the exhaustion etched into her face, and finally into her eyes. "The rules didn't apply to this variable," she whispered. "Why?" Emily asked, reaching out. Her fingers brushed Scarlett's cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin, the tension in her jaw. "Why didn't they apply?" Scarlett leaned into the touch, a surrender that felt momentous. She closed her eyes, letting out a shuddering breath that seemed to rattle her entire frame. "Because you were the variable, Emily, and I couldn't let the structure collapse." The admission hung in the air, fragile and heavy. It was the truth they had been dancing around for weeks, hidden behind metaphors of architecture and triage. Emily felt her heart slam against her ribs. "Scarlett," she whispered. Scarlett opened her eyes. The hunger was back, but it wasn't the predatory curiosity of the office. It was raw, desperate need. She reached out, gripping Emily's waist with hands that were usually steady but now trembled with restraint. She pulled Emily closer, burying her face against the soft fabric of Emily's scrubs, right over her stomach. "I am so tired," Scarlett murmured, her voice muffled against the cotton. "I am so tired of the silence, of the precision." Emily threaded her fingers through Scarlett's hair. It was silky, unpinned, smelling of the same surgical soap they all used, but underneath that, the sandalwood was still there. "Then make some noise," Emily whispered. Scarlett looked up. The invitation was clear. She pulled Emily down, and the collision was inevitable. The kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a desperate, crashing thing. A release of weeks of texts, of near misses in the hallway, of intellectual sparring and shared terror. Scarlett's lips were soft but insistent, tasting of stale coffee and wintergreen mints. Emily made a small sound in her throat, a whimper of relief, her hands gripping Scarlett's shoulders to anchor herself as the world spun. They fell back onto the narrow, scratchy hospital bed, a tangle of limbs and scrubs. The sensory details were sharp and unromantic. The hum of the vending machine down the hall, the hardness of the mattress, the harsh light from the window. But it felt perfect. It felt real. Scarlett broke the kiss, gasping for air, her forehead resting against Emily's. Her eyes were blown wide, dark with arousal and a flicker of panic. "This is ill-advised," she whispered, breathless. "The power dynamic, the HR implications, the optics are catastrophic." "I don't care about the optics," Emily said, pulling her back, her thumb tracing the line of Scarlett's lower lip. "I care about the fact that you're the only person who knows how to calibrate my frequency. I care that you saved my son." Scarlett let out a low laugh, a sound of genuine surrender that vibrated against Emily's chest. "The suture," she whispered, closing her eyes as Emily kissed her jaw. "We are the suture, holding the edges of the wound together." "Is that a yes?" Emily asked, pulling back just enough to see her face. Scarlett looked at her, the analysis complete, the decision made. "That," she said, pulling Emily down for a kiss that was slower, deeper, and full of promises, "is a binding contract." Outside, the sky was beginning to turn the bruised purple of pre-dawn. The hospital would wake up soon. The rumors would swirl. But in the dark of the on-call room, with the city lights painting stripes across the sheets, none of that mattered. They had found the signal in the static, and it was loud. It took 3 weeks for the new protocol to fully integrate. The hospital rumor mill had churned through the "chief of surgery saves nurse's kids" story and eventually moved on to a scandal in radiology involving a stolen MRI magnet, leaving Emily and Scarlett in a strange, quiet pocket of privacy. They didn't meet in the hospital anymore, at least not for anything other than professional handoffs where the air was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. The risk was too high, and frankly, the environment was too sterile for what they were building. Instead, they met on neutral ground, in the spaces between the shifts, carving out a routine that felt illicit and domestic all at once. It was a Saturday afternoon, crisp and bright. The city park was vibrant with the chaotic energy of late autumn, crunching leaves, screaming children, and the smell of roasted nuts and damp earth. Emily sat on a wooden bench, her legs stretched out, watching Leo climb a jungle gym with the reckless abandonment of a child who had completely forgotten he couldn't breathe a month ago. Beside her, Scarlett Vance looked different. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal and dark, well-fitted jeans. No white coat, no stethoscope, no ID badge. She looked softer, the sharp angles of her professional armor smoothed out by the weekend air and the lack of fluorescent lighting. But she was still Scarlett. She was currently analyzing the structural stability of the slide Leo was attempting to conquer. "The incline is approximately 40 degrees, Scarlett noted, sipping her coffee from a paper cup. "The friction coefficient seems low given the humidity. He is going to accelerate rapidly." "He's fine," Emily said, bumping her shoulder against Scarlett's. "He bounces. It's a feature of being 6. You fall down, you get up." Scarlett hummed, a low vibration in her throat, but she didn't look away from the boy. "I am not accustomed to variables that bounce. In my theater, gravity is usually unforgiving." "You're learning," Emily teased, reaching out to take Scarlett's hand. It was a bold move. They were in public. Anyone could see them. A colleague, a patient, a board member walking their purebred poodle. Scarlett didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through Emily's, her grip firm and grounding. Her hand was warm, the skin soft against Emily's rougher, sanitized knuckles. "Dr. Henderson is walking near the duck pond," Scarlett said calmly, not turning her head. 3 o'clock. He is watching us. Emily stiffened, her instinct to withdraw flaring up. She started to pull her hand back, the old fear of authority kicking in. "Do you want to let go?" Scarlett turned to look at her then. The sun caught the blue of her eyes, making them look less like ice and more like open sky. There was no hesitation in her face, no calculation of political cost. "No, I have recalculated the risk assessment, and the risk is acceptable," Scarlett said. She squeezed Emily's hand, anchoring her to the bench. "The data suggests that the benefits of this connection outweigh the potential social fallout. The heart rhythm, it requires a dual lead to function correctly. A single lead is prone to interference. We are stronger in parallel." "You are such a nerd," Emily laughed, the sound bubbling up from her chest, light and free. A romantic nerd, but a nerd. I am precise, Scarlett corrected, a small, rare smile playing on her lips. And you, Nurse Hayes, are the only variable I have no intention of controlling. Good, Emily said, resting her head on Scarlett's shoulder as they watched Leo reach the top of the slide and raise his arms in victory. Because I'm pretty sure I'm uncontrollable. I know, Scarlett whispered, kissing the top of her head. That's the best part. Mom, look! Leo shouted from the slide. I'm a rocket! I see you, Rocket, Emily yelled back. Trajectory looks good, Scarlett called out, her voice projecting with that familiar command, though stripped of its edges. Launch approved, Emily smiled, closing her eyes for a moment against the sun. The mistake text, the wrong number, the drowning sensation. It had all led here, to a park bench in October, with a woman who saw the world in spreadsheets but loved like a forest fire. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated, and they still argued about how to load the dishwasher. Scarlett had a system, obviously, but it was real. The text message had been an error, a glitch in the system, but it turned out to be the most accurate data point of her life. The car was warm, the heater battling the November chill outside. They were parked in Emily's driveway, the engine idling. Leo was asleep in the back seat. Emily's hand rested on the center console, and Scarlett's hand was linked over hers, their fingers knotted together. The phone on the dashboard buzzed. A notification lit up the dark interior. Do not answer. Hospital admin. Neither of them looked at it. The signal is clear now, Emily whispered, squeezing Scarlett's hand. No interference. Just the steady hum, Scarlett agreed, leaning across the console to kiss her. 2 lives, finally syncing up. If you want to hear more stories about finding the perfect frequency in the static, hit subscribe.